God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Let's shed some light on the matter. Your face just lit up. That he's just a salt of the earth kind of guy. You need to be worth your salt. Now, I could keep offering lots of these metaphors. They're familiar. You know, these metaphors of salt and light really work their way into the common vernacular. And so we kind of start to take for granted what they actually mean. What does it mean to be salt of the earth? You know, what does it mean to be a light for the world? So let's shine some light on this. So looking at light, first of all, you know, I think about two uses for light. There are many more, but two that I want to highlight today. One is that light it reveals things. If something is hidden in the dark, you shine light on it, it's out in the open. And another thing that light does is it facilitates growth. Right? Living things need light to grow. So to look at the first one about how light reveals things. You know, I'm very much aware of a pain in our denomination and in other denominations right now. And I feel very clear that this is something that light needs to be shined on. Right? And it's the issue of homosexuality. Okay? So I know that there's a range of opinions, certainly within the United Methodist Church and even within our own little congregation. As far as I know, I think most of you support equality, marriage equality, or support equal rights for LGBT people. I know that some of you believe that being homosexual is wrong, that it is a sin. And I'll say, I respect your right to your opinion, absolutely. And we can be part of the same community of faith. We can be part of the body of Christ and disagree on this. And let's talk about it. If you're disagreeing with me and you just want to talk to me about it, and this bothers you, don't suffer in silence. Talk to me. I'll take you out for coffee. I'll take you out for lunch. Let's talk. And then I know that there are others who would rather just not talk about it. You know, who say, well, it's okay if you're born gay or lesbian or bisexual. I guess there's not anything wrong with it, but don't put it out in everybody's face, right? Like, we don't have to talk about it all the time. And I know there's some, if I address it in church 4 times a year, that's 4 times too many, right? But I'm talking about it again today. And same thing, I absolutely respect your right to have that opinion, that it's not something that should be talked about. But I disagree with that opinion, because heterosexual couples get to just be a couple in public. You know, when Barry and I were engaged, we got to announce it in church, everybody clapped, and it was wonderful. And we get to celebrate our relationship with all of you. It's fantastic. Now, if either one of us was of a different orientation, I don't take for granted that it would be the same kind of thing. And so saying that same-sex couples need to just be quiet and go and hide and do their own little thing, that's akin to separate but equal, in my opinion, from the civil rights movement. Saying that they should stay hidden and be separate is basically relegating same-sex couples to second-class citizenry. Saying that we don't want to see you is a way of saying we don't think that you're equal. And that's my opinion. Now, all of this to say, our mainline churches are having a hard time with this. Now, some of them have figured it out, and as a denomination, support same-sex marriage and support people's right to be homosexual, to be who they are. The Unitarians have figured it out, the UCC has figured it out, the Episcopal Church has figured it out, the Presbyterian Church has almost figured it out. But then there are others that are still split and divided, and the United Methodist Church is one of those that's still split and divided. And we might be for a while, because we're unique as a Protestant denomination in that we are a global denomination. So all the decisions that are made by a global body at our General Conference. And so that means that we have lots of delegates from the global south who tend to be much more conservative on issues of sexuality, certainly sexual orientation. So we could be divided for quite a while. Now, our own New York Annual Conference, which we are a part of, is really progressive in sexuality and has been for a long time. We've passed lots of resolutions saying that we disagree with our denomination's stance that homosexuality is a sin. All right, so as a conference, we really support equality. But there are some vocal minority voices, even within our conference. And that is why there are 2 clergy in our conference who have been brought up on charges. All right? And one of them is charged for being a, this is the language, self-avowed, practicing homosexual. Because she's been open about the fact that she's an ordained Methodist clergy and is married to another woman, and they're raising 2 kids together. And so she's been brought up on charges for that. And then the other person, of course, who we mentioned before, was brought up in charges because when his son asked him to officiate at his wedding, he said yes. What's wrong with that? His son was marrying another man. And so he's been brought up on charges for performing a same-sex marriage. Now, we could talk about this a whole lot, but I just want to give a snapshot. I just want to shine some light on this and say that this is happening. And I don't think that we should ignore it and pretend that it's not. And I'll tell you, one reason that I really think we shouldn't ignore it and pretend that it's not happening is because religious rhetoric does a lot to prop up and support and feed anti-gay rhetoric, and even anti-gay violence. And so as a religious person, as a clergy person, I feel a particular responsibility to speak out for this. I would hate to see any of my kids' peers suffer, go through depression, even consider suicide, as many young LGBT kids do, because they believe that they're second-class citizens and that they need to hide. And because that language of calling them second-class citizens is often supported by religious language. Texts are taken from the Bible to support the notion that homosexuality is a sin. Right. So we can say that we think it's a sin, but we love gay people. But saying it's a sin only encourages discrimination and prejudice. That's my opinion. And that's why I think a light needs to be shed on it. And the reason I think a light needs to be shed on it brings me to the second purpose of light, which is to facilitate growth. It's the very act of shedding a light on something sets in motion a process that we don't even control. It sets in motion a process of growth and healing. All we have to do is just shine a light, and then God does the work to heal and to grow. So, if you think about it, even in the physical world, what happens to things in the dark? They fester, right? The things that grow in the dark are mold or pus on a wound. You have to open it up and expose it for some healing to happen. And that's true on a broader social level, as with the LGBT issue, but it's also true on a personal level or an interpersonal level. I mean, we all know that if we just stuff things long enough, and don't look at them and pretend that they're not there, pretend that they're not a problem, I mean, what happens when we keep doing that? It comes out in really ugly, unhealthy, destructive ways. All right, this is kind of basic psychology 101. That's what happens when you don't allow light to shine on something. So that's light. And I'll just spend a little bit of time on salt, too, because this is a really interesting metaphor. So salt does a couple of things. One, it enhances the flavor of food. And then 2, it preserves food, too. Right? So if you think about what salt does, if you use it well, it simply draws attention to the good flavor that's already there. Right? If something is salted well, it's not like you taste the salt. It just brings out the flavors that are already there. Right? So when Jesus is saying, be salt, he's saying, bring out the goodness that's already there, that God has already created in the world around us and in the people around us. Goodness is already there. Just support it. Bring it out. Encourage it. And just like if there's too much salt, it draws attention to the salt, it's the same thing for us. If there's too much of us and our ego and our agenda or our need to control or whatever, it's actually not going to enhance the goodness. It's going to overpower it. So salt brings out the flavor, and then salt also preserves food. We're not as aware of that use because we have refrigeration, but if we didn't, we would really be aware of how important salt is, how necessary it is for nourishment. Now, it's interesting in the passage that it says if salt loses its saltiness, that it's not, that it's useless. And I was thinking about that, like, does salt actually lose its flavor? Because I had a thing of salt that I carried around with me like 5 different moves, and it never really lost its flavor. So I looked this up, and actually, sodium chloride can be watered down. Right? So if water is added, it can actually dissolve the sodium chloride, and so salt actually can lose its flavor only if it's watered down and diluted enough. So I think that's worth thinking about. Is anything diluting your saltiness? Well, who knows? Being too busy, fear, worried, being preoccupied with what other people are doing wrong and how other people are wrong. There are all kinds of things that can dilute our saltiness. I just invite you to think about that. You're being watered down right now. So be shiny, be salty. Now, there's something, I'm saying this as a commandment, all right, but there's something really cool about the way Jesus says it. So just a couple more minutes, because this is really worth pointing out. I don't want to give you another commandment. I don't want to add one more thing to your to-do list. I don't want to give you one more way that you just don't measure up, or another way that you feel like you need to do better and try harder. Okay, I've got this. I need to be shiny. I need to be salty. Because the way that Jesus says it, it is wonderful. He doesn't say, be light, be salt. He says, you are salt of the earth. You are light of the world. You already are. That's a blessing. Right? Remember last week we talked about how it's a blessing to be a blessing? So shining a light into dark places, bringing out the goodness that's already there, that's a blessing to all those around you, and in turn,